Hello, everyone. I know this is a different sort of stream. I'm going to be moving a lot of things around. Oh, I forgot to turn on the fireplace in the back so you guys can hear it if you're a VOD watcher. Or rather, if you're a VOD watcher, I'm sorry, but you won't hear the fireplace in the background. If you're live, however, thank you for stopping by and enjoy the storytelling with a little more soft spoken and some fireplace background noise. Hello, Maya. Yes, I'm up late. I'm deciding to push forward on certain priorities and to establish myself as a certain. I'm not sure what the word is. As a certain vibe, I suppose. And so moving forward, it will be more like this. A lot more chill and relaxing. No yelling. And mostly solo content. That being said, tonight's story is going to be the side stories from Final Fantasy XIV. I'll get enough sleep eventually, but thank you for your concern. So, for context, this story is about the scions of the Seventh Dawn, still within their formative years, their early years of Realm Reborn. So this is not the main story, but some added context to character. Some that might help you appreciate the characters that show up, especially seeing as the current plan, so far that I'm aware of, is to play A Realm Reborn with Lunri Lu on their stream. I myself won't be streaming it, but you're more than welcome to join us in her adventure, so long as she's chosen to keep me around anyway. That said, let's get started. So, one name, one promise. In this den of pirates and thieves, those who cast the darkest shadows are wont to wear white. Helps them blend in, disappear into the streetscape. In that sense, I reckon you were born for this line of work. So the man mused indifferently as he grabbed the small boy's silver locks. They were not father and son, nor blood relatives of any sort. Just a child who knew no life but that on the streets, and a merchant of ill repute who was all too eager to employ the urchin in one shady scheme after the next. Business partners, and nothing more. It was a different time, back in the days before Admiral Merlwyb forbade piracy and brought a measure of order to Limsa. It was in that lawless place a street rat, could do worse for allies than a black marketeer of questionable moral fiber. Needless to say, some patrons were bad, while others were worse. Allow yourself to be lured in by the promise of easy coin, and you might find yourself with a cutlass to your chin. There was but one constant. Once the job was done, both parties moved on, sometimes without so much as a fare thee well. And thus Thancred spent his formative years. For better or for worse, he was an apt pupil, agile of body and sharp of mind. He could take care of himself, and gave the dangers that lurked at every turn a suitable wide berth. At one point, he even managed to integrate himself with the dutiful sisters, keepers of the code, feared even by the most fearsome buccaneers. And yet, in the end, he chose to move on. There was something about them, the quiet passion, the pride they took in their work, that never sat right with the boy. It was by no means a glamorous life, nor less an easy one. But it was the only life he knew. That is, until the dark day he took it into his head to ply his trade on the piers. Word had it that a trader was arriving across the seas, and coin purses would be flush with gil and ripe for the taking. The elderly Elizin, whom he chose as his mark, had other ideas, however. No sooner had the boy lifted a hand than he found himself flat on his back, his limbs bound by powerful magics. A short life in Gaul beckoned, or perhaps a quick death. And then the strangest thing happened. The man took him by the hand, led him to a quiet corner away from the bustling crowds, looked straight him in the eye, and said, My name is Louis Leveleur. I'm a scholar from across the seas. What is your name, child? Tancred, the boy mumbled, still in disbelief. Tancred, what? Have you any family? The old man continued, with a sympathetic smile. Just Tancred, the boy shrugged. And I don't have a family, at least, not that I know of. The man who had called himself Louis paused for a moment, stroking his beard, before appearing to come to a conclusion. You are quick and able beyond your years. Were you only at a place where you could learn to use these gifts for the good of all, rather than merely as tools for your own survival, why, there's no telling what life you might lead. Tancred listened in silence, his frown speaking volumes. It's not as if I chose this, you know. But Louisoix responded in a sad yet knowing smile, and the words that would change the boy's life forever. Come to me, Charlian. You are a gifted child, and there's much that I would teach you. And so it was Tancred's new life. And so it was that Tancred's new life began. To commemorate the occasion, Tancred was to claim the surname of Waters. Such flourishes had been unnecessary on the Leamington streets, but would be indispensable in more respectable locales. Tancred chafed at first, not keen to declare his lowly heritage to all and sundry, but Master Louisoix would brook no opposition. Thalic, garden of rushing rivers and purveyor of knowledge, the sage mused, a lad such as yourself could do far worse than a protector, as a protector. And so Tancred grudgingly accepted the name that he would wear that he would come to wear with pride. Good morning, Cinema. Louisoix also found a suitable mentor for the child, an old hand in covert operations who would train Tancred to follow his printless footsteps. Charlian was a society that valued knowledge and expertise in all forms, and shadowy agents were not as shunned as disreputable rogues, but respected as key contributors to the nation. It was such a capacity that Louisoix hoped that the boy might excel and find his true calling. Stunned as he was in this turn of events, Tancred was no fool. He understood the future Louisoix envisioned for him, and endeavored to do all that he could to meet his patron's expectations. He honed his body that he might infiltrate the most impregnable of strongholds in the harshest of environments, that his mind might charm the wariest merchants and socialites in the most critical of circumstances. Before he knew it, the streetwise child of Leamington alleyway was no more. In his place stood a confident youth who could pose as anyone's friend, and confident as long enough to procure the knowledge his client demanded. A short while later, Tancred's surpassing skills were recognized, and upon his skin was inscribed the sigil of an archon. When Louisoix gazed upon this mark, he could scarce contain his joy. The boy he had personally led out of penury, had taken under his wing, had realized his potential. It was about this time that Tancred first met the child he knew only as Acelia, one of the first recruits to Master Louisoix's circle of knowing. He was on a top-secret mission in Ul'dah, tasked with doing what he could to quell the flames of war that threatened to gulf Eorzea. To his acquaintances, he was simply a traveling bard hoping to hone his skills and study swordplay in the land of gladiators and mercenaries. In truth, his mission was to use his knowledge of the primals as a bargaining chip, that he might gain the trust of the Syndicate, the Sultana, and many others who wielded influence in this land overflowing with wealth and intrigue, in the hope that he might stave off, however briefly, the threat of warlike Garlemald. But the best laid plans of men oft go awry, and it is not long ago until tragedy reared its ugly head. The child Tancred had only just befriended was consigned to a crueler fate than he had known. As the dust settled, the young girl clung to her father, pleading with the gods for him to remain a moment longer. A part of him was keenly aware that the child was all alone now, as he had once been. This part pitied her, knowing that she would be forced to sacrifice to live in this cruel and unfeeling world. Yet another part of him, a more selfish part, he would admit, seething with pain and regret. As much as he has grown, as strong as he had become, in the end he was powerless. I failed her when she needed me most. Fortunately, the child was not without friends in the world. The songstress Flamin soon resolved to serve as her guardian and protector, and so Thancred's role in the child's story came to an end, or it seemed as if it might. But for reasons he struggled to explain, he could not let go so easily. Perhaps it was the knowledge that the child's father had betrayed his Garlean spy masters before his death, and that danger might still follow his wake. Or perhaps it was something far simpler, though the former made for a convenient excuse. Needless to say, he had many more important responsibilities. Nevertheless, whenever his duties brought him to Ul'dah, he would make sure to look in on Asilia, lest he get caught up in anything unsavory. Dispatching common louts was easy enough, but on those occasions he had found himself face to face with an undercover Garlean operative. No doubt no one had followed her father's trail. Shivers would run down his spine. When it became clear that it would be nigh impossible to shake their trail, Thancred decided to step forth from the shadows and make a proposition. You should take on a new name, assume a new life. Only then might you free yourself of your father's legacy. Trust me, it's for your own good. Asilia looked into his eyes and considered the very implication of his words without prejudice. After a moment, she nodded in agreement. Very well. What name shall I take? Thancred closed his eyes, thought briefly for a moment, then spoke. Minfilia, he said with quiet conviction. Minfilia Ward. It was nearly as inspired a name as the one Louisoix had convinced him to embrace so many years ago. A common enough name for a Highlander girl, yet not one so overused as to draw unnecessary attention. A name that would keep her safe in Thancred's absence. Minfilia, she said with a smile. Yes, I rather like the sound of it. One night, after seeing some reconnaissance task or other, Thancred found himself aimlessly wandering the streets of Ul'dah, as he wont to do. It was then he spotted Minfilia, sporting a pickaxe and other assorted gear. This girl is nothing if not devoted to the cause. Is something the matter? He asked. Surely your tasks don't require you to stay out quite so late? Oh, Thancred, Minfilia responded calmly. It's nothing, really. I simply got distracted. For all her outward projection of strength, something was clearly weighing on the girl's mind. And so, Thancred flashed an understanding smile and offered to escort her home. It was not far to the humble abode where she lived with Flamin, and he had hoped that he might learn more of her troubles. The conversation quickly turned from that topic to the rumors of the day, and several inconsequential laughs later, they arrived at their destination. Thank you, Thancred, Minfilia offered, before fixing him with a look. Do take care not to overdo it at the tavern. You are too quick to forget yourself, especially in the company of women. I will heed your sage advice as if my very life depended on it, Thancred replied in a tone that made it clear he had no intention of doing anything of the sort. Minfilia sighed as she pushed the wooden door open. For a moment, the warm, orange-hued glow of the lanterns within bathed the alley and Thancred in light. With a farewell wave, the girl stepped inside as the door closed behind her with a creak. That fleeting glimpse of warmth and tranquility vanished along with her. From beyond the threshold, 1,000 moms away, came a gentle voice. Welcome home, my dear. Alone in the alley, Thancred took a deep breath. It is not for you. He had seen the girl safely home and thought it had been a simple task. And though it had been a simple task, he felt prouder than he had in a long, long time. How many years has it been? Thancred had long since lost count. He had pondered the memory as he delved deeper into the tunnels beneath the city of Yulmore in the first. Quite literally a world away from home. Just as he had been many times in his younger days, he was here on a mission to rescue a young girl. The streets of Yulmore were lined with soaring, majestic buildings carved from pristine white marble, though there were many differences, of course. Thancred could not help but be reminded of Limsa Lominsa. In this den of pirates and thieves, those who cast the darkest shadows are wont to wear white. He had shed the Yulmoran soldier's garb he had worn to gain entry, donning in its stead his own coat of purest white. The garments were light and flowing, befitting a man who had traded 2 daggers for a gun-blade, a man resolved to serve as a guardian and protector. The white, too, was Thancred's choice, a color that would allow him to travel unmarked in this world flooded with light. Were he an honorable knight, burning with a sense of duty, no doubt he would have chosen to clad himself in black, raising high the villain's flag in a land where despots draped themselves in the mantle of virtue. But such indulgences would have to wait until after. He had to save her. The reef from which the city of Yulmore was carved extended far below the surface of the ocean. The massive subterranean chamber in which Thancred found himself was said to have been used as a storehouse in one age, and a safe haven to shelter to the people from the sin-eaters in another. Under the rule of Lord Vothry, it had been converted into a makeshift gaol and pantry for meal, the substance that served to provide sustenance to the citizens of Yulmore and to secure their loyalty. It was the deepest chamber of those cavernous halls that Thancred sought, a location he had identified only months of reconnaissance. He evaded the eyes of a watchman, painlessly and effortlessly dispatching those whom he deemed might interfere with their escape. But were he on his own, infiltrating the most heavily guarded areas of Yulmore would be a simple task. But to spirit away a prisoner, a child who knew nothing of the battlefield, no less, he would need to take every precaution. After disposing of yet another guard, Thancred arrived at his destination. Though his allies in the first called her Minfilia, the Exarch had cautioned him not to expect a reunion. Even so, Thancred felt a connection with this girl he had yet to meet. He knew in his heart of hearts that what he must do. Exhaling softly, he turned the key and unlocked the door. The chamber was unnervingly ordinary. Where Thancred had expected a dank cell, he found instead a simple yet all too comfortable-looking bed, a smallish chest of drawers, a desk, and a matching chair suitable for study, equipped with a parchment and quill. The centerpiece of the room was a mighty bookshelf, lined from top to bottom, end to end with impressive tomes. Aside from the lack of windows, one would scarcely have cause to complain. Yet this made this makeshift cell all the more unsettling. There was no despair, nor was there any hope to be found. It was simply a place for the God King of Yulmore to keep the Oracle of Light as his prisoner and pet until the end of days. Sitting atop the bed in the center of the chamber, the young child turned to her unexpected visitor and stared at him with eyes of crystal. You are? The girl's voice was at once reminiscent of and entirely different from young Asilia's. Another life had been waiting beyond that door, a life of love and hope, of family. Minfilia, it's time to go. As Thancred spoke the name, he saw her smile in the dark, her silhouette against the blinding light. He extended a hand, another moment's hesitation. The girl took it. This time I will make it right. I actually forgot that while it is touching upon the characters in the early years, it does connect to the expansion of Shadowbringers. So you can see that, this is Thancred later on and within Shadowbringers. As to why her name is Minfilia, well, you'll just have to find out in your own playthrough of Final Fantasy, should you decide to take the plunge. That said, we've only been gone for about 20 minutes, so let's go to the next one. Echoes of Delusion. Alright. The evening found them at their usual table at the Shiokaze Hostelry, though he and his traveling companion had now become a familiar sight in Kugane. There, a few there had any inkling just how odd a pair they made. A dragon slayer, albeit retired, and a dragnet. It's well you had me to get us out of our predicament, Orin Kai observed in that insufferably smug tone of his, and not for the first time. But this, Estinian decided, was one too many. Face darkening, he snatched a piece of sun-dried squid, known to the locals as surume, from the plate between them, making the diminutive dragon blink. A predicament of your making, your false lead that caused us needless toil. Tearing off some chewy squid between his teeth, he let out an irritated sigh. Gods, how did it come to this? But the answer he knew all too well. It had begun amidst smoke and ash in the gimlet dark, when he had plucked the warrior of light from the jaws of death. Having borne his stricken comrade to the Asgardian encampment, he had promptly taken his leave, reasoning that his skill with the lance would be of more use on the battlefield than in the infirmary. And so he turned his steps back towards the fighting, minded to lend the alliance his strength, only to learn it was no longer needed, for Xenos had withdrawn from the front lines, leaving the Imperial forces defanged and in disarray. Thus had Estinian found himself aimlessly wandering the snow-soaked fields of Corythus, which is where he had heard a familiar draconic voice calling on to him, Orin Kai. In the past, he had aided the dragnet in his quest to find his sire's long-lost consort, a journey to the far east which had, it would seem, given the creature a taste for adventure. And now he wanted Estinian to accompany him on another. "I've no interest in playing nursemaid," Estinian had replied in a tone that brooked no discussion. But Orin Kai was not to be discouraged. Having inquired into the adolescent's age, he retorted with a smirk, "I've lived tenfold your years. It would see I'm as the one who must play nursemaid." In such manner did their conversation unfold, and a pain began to manifest in Estinian's temples, first niggling and raging, until driven to the limits of his patience. He had declared with a snarl, "I had forsaken the slaying of dragons, but for you mayhap I shall take an exception." This said, he had drawn his lance and made it as if to thrust it at his interlocutor, who duly cheered. "That's the spirit," Orin Kai gleefully exclaimed before proceeding to appraise Estinian of his plans. He had previously heard tell, he explained, of an intriguing legend, that of Seriu, a dragon worshipped in the East as a benevolent guardian, but feared in certain corners as a man-eating fiend. "I wish to ascertain the truth of the tales. If this dragon devours man-flesh, as some believe, it fails us to end its reign of terror." And so it was that the Azure Dragoon had set forth once more to the far east, a none too willing traveling companion to an all too willful dragnet. And through painstaking effort, trudging hither and yon gathering information, they had learned the truth of legend, to their mutual disappointment. For the dragon known as Seriu was no dragon at all, at least not the kind they knew, but something akin to a serpent. And to compound their chagrin, the quest had dragged on far longer than intended. They had found themselves at the limits of their funds. For some days they were forced to endure empty bellies, but their luck had turned in when Orin Kai came to the attention of the proprietor of Kugane's most famous hostelry. Like many a Hinken, the woman believed dragons to be bringers of good fortune, and she had offered them board and lodging in exchange for attracting customers. "And here we are, a spectacle for drunkards." "How ungrateful," Orin Kai said with a mock indignance. "I find myself less and less inclined to sear your squid." As little as Estinian cared for the dragon's pertness, in that moment he cared less for the dry rice wine without a savory accompaniment. "Fine, I'm grateful," he managed, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "Now, sear me another one, will you?" Seemingly placated, Ornkai breathed fire upon the surume, which released a mouth-watering aroma as it crackled and charred. Estinian allowed it a moment to cool before helping himself to another bite of this strangely addictive snack. Even as he savored the flavor and texture, footsteps rang from the direction of the tavern's entrance. "Welcome to the Shiokaze Hostery," Ornkai cheerily called out to the newly arrived patrons. With a brief shake of his head, Estinian drew breath to offer his own half-hearted greeting, only for the words to die on his lips when he turned around and saw two Lalafellan maidens standing upon the threshold. "There you are," shrilled one in the pink kimono. Though she had adopted the local attire, there was no mistaking Taru, the Scion's indomitable receptionist. And beside her, even less mistakable in her distinctive robe, was Kryle Beldesian, staring wide-eyed at him. Whatever it was the Archon saw, it was clearly amusing her, for she had suddenly racked paroxysms of poorly stifled laughter. "Forgive me," she said, tearily, struggling for breath. "I had heard that the Asia Dragoon had hung up his lance, but I did not expect that he would take up serving train instead." To that assessment, Estenian could offer no retort, and as much as her amusement irked him, above all he was troubled by the keeping sense that he was about to be drawn yet to another bothersome affair. He turned to Ornkai. "This time we went our separate ways, little one. But so long as you remain here, you shan't want for comfort. Fare you well." Sparing the visitors no further glance, Estinian picked up his travel sack with the tip of his lance, swung it over his shoulder, and leapt. He shot up the hostelry's upper level, landing gracefully amidst the startled travelers, who broke out in rapturous applause in what they assumed to be a performance. Disregarding the ovation, he dashed through the door and out into the night. He knew at once where to bend his steps. Kugane Ohashi. Across the bridge, there lay the rest of Shishu, entry to which was forbidden to all Ijin save a privileged few. Surely it would be the last place they would think to look for him. But he had scarcely settled into the spot against the bridge balustrade to let the haze of the wine clear his head when, among the passing traffic, the Lalafels appeared again. "You do know they won't let you pass without one of these." Tatani waved a parchment in front of him bearing a Far Eastern script and a crimson seal. "An entry permit. Why am I not surprised?" But it was surprising how quickly they had managed to track him down. At that moment, a boat plying the channel below chanced to draw near. He did not stop to think and sprung into its mast. A few moments and several leaps later, Estinian was taking in the city from the roof of Kugane Castle, a self-satisfied grin upon his face. "Let them try and find me here." Absent-mindedly, he withdrew what was left of his surname of Surume from his pocket where he had secreted it, raising it to his mouth, and stared. On a nearby walkway, two Lalafels were emerging, led by Seki Sigumi Blade bearing a lantern. "What sorcery is this?" In that instant, it occurred to Estinian that they may well have a good reason to seek him out. The thought quickly faded, however. Perhaps it was the wine, a potent variety sourced from the main island, or perhaps it was his nature. But the more they pursued him, the more determined he became to elude them. "I just need to steer clear until morning." Thus resolved, he stepped off the rooftop and dropped down to the ground. After what seemed like an eternity, the sky began to take on the gray of dawn. A little longer, and the Kuroboro Maru would leave the port and bear Estinian away, beyond the reach of Scion troubles. But even as he allowed himself to hope, the self-same cheery voice that had haunted him all night rang out. "Anyone would think you were trying to avoid us." "You can't be serious." Groaning inwardly, he turned his face to his unrelenting pursuers, his mind racing as he considered his options. It was then that the Beldesian woman fell to one knee, cradling her head. "Are you all right?" Tataru crouched down beside her companion in a state of alarm. The Archon had plainly overexerted herself during her night-long game of cat and mouse. Unable to stop himself from feeling the pressure of culpability, he was out to proffer a hand when Krau's shoulders began to shake with laughter, as poorly stifled as before. "Oh, Stinian, never would I have imagined—" She made an effort to look at him, but the sight of his face seemed only to add to her amusement, sending her into further paroxysms. Paroxysms? "What's this now? Did you see something from his past?" Tataru asked, her voice dripping with curiosity. Though it was already well on the way of being a warm day, Estinian felt a chill to rival a Querthian night. He knew that, like the warrior of light and Ysael, Kral was blessed with the echo, and could peer into the past through another's eyes. He could not begin to guess which mortifying episode of his life she had just witnessed. There were simply too many. Finally composing herself, Kral stood up and regarded Estinian with a look of pity. "Be at ease. I'm not so heartless as to reveal what I saw. Not here and now, at any rate." "Damn you to the bottom of the seventh hell." "But enough about that," she continued sweetly. "We were hoping to speak with you, if you have a moment." Estinian's shoulders rose and fell as he sighed in resignation. The chase was over. Later that morning, Estinian stood upon the deck of a merchant vessel bound for Razatan, on his way to the Empire. He had been charged with finding, and if possible, destroying, an alchemical weapon by the name of Black Rose. Left unchecked, the Garleans would inevitably bring deadly gas to bear against their enemies, his guardian among them. The method of his recruitment apart, he could not well stand idly by while his comrades were thus threatened, nor could he deny that he was well suited for the task. He gazed out at the ruby sea. He rested his hand upon the reassuring weight hanging at his waist, a leather pouch heavy with coin. The spoils
This party's
of
getting crazy. Let's rock.
Where was I? Well, that's unfortunate. I'll have to find my place. But hello,
This party's getting crazy.
Hello,
Let's
Quayla.
rock.
Thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. As you can see, I am reading stories from Final Fantasy XIV in a more soft-spoken style of stream. Something I'm kind of pushing towards for my content moving on. But thank you. I appreciate that. As to why the auto shout-out did not occur, I don't know why. And unfortunately, I can only shout out one of you. So, to those who haven't already, please do check out Reniana. They are a member of the Dragon's Council and a friend of mine. Prima, on the other hand, is a new name I don't recall. Perhaps we have met and I've simply forgotten. But regardless, thank you both for the raid. If you need to raid and run, feel free to do so. I'll only be going here for another half hour, just telling stories from Final Fantasy XIV. Which, by the way, if you haven't heard, they're having a free login month from the 15th of this month to the 15th of the next. And so I implore you, if you haven't already tried the game, by all means check it out. If not, well, there is no there is no penalty for not doing so. That said, let's continue on where we were. He gazed out at the ruby sea. He rested his hand upon the reassuring weight hanging at his waist, a leather pouch heavy with coin. The spoils of some lucrative venture pertaining to Far Eastern legends, according to Tataru. Yet another bothersome journey. At least I shan't want for funds. Reaching into his travel sack, he pulled out a piece of freshly seared surume, a parting gift from Ornkai. He took a bite, making sure to chew it slowly. There's no telling when he would see any more. Around the same time, Tataru and Kral were sitting at the Shiokaze's hostelry, taking refreshments with their new friend Ornkai. So tell us, Kral, Tataru began, her cheeks flushed from the rice wine. What scandalous event from Estinian's past did you see? Like the morning sun peering over the horizon, a coil A coy smile slowly broke on Krau's lips. I'm sorry? Would it give you the impression I saw such a thing? Their boisterous laughter could be heard as far away as the water's edge, but thankfully not beyond. The third one. I wonder who this is about. Probably about Sir Garland, if I were to guess. Let's see. A World Forsaken. The objective: to record and analyze events surrounding the 8th Umbral Calamity based on information extrapolated from statements and reports made by Sid Garland. Following a series of decisive victories, the former imperial colonies of Doma and Alamigo overthrew their provincial rulers and secured independence from Garlemald. This prompted other occupied territories to rise up against their oppressors and join forces with the Eorzean and Eastern alliances. The Garleans responded by marching the bulk of their troops to Gimlet and the Alamigan border, where allied armies gathered to repel them. Although peace negotiations were attempted, the difference between the opposing sides proved to be irreconcilable, with open warfare the only viable recourse. Against expectation, the well-equipped and highly organized Imperial legions failed to capitalize on their early advantage, allowing the alliance to strike a counterattack. One possible cause for such an ineffectual display on the part of the Garlean troops is the high proportion of scripted soldiers who, in the words of Master Sid, lacked the conviction required to maximize their combat capabilities. Unfortunately, I am not programmed to assess such unquantifiable variables, and this theory must therefore be dismissed as mere conjecture. I can, however, state with some degree of certainty that the arrival of the ones known as the Signs of the Seventh Dawn was a critical factor in the Garleans' defeat. Oh, I see now. We're speaking from the point of view of an elegant node, a history recorder. After the Empire's withdrawal, Sid Garland and his ironworked colleagues, including the elusive Nero Sceva, traveled to the Burn on the Othardian subcontinent to bolster the field generators at Syria's wall in preparation for the Garleans' next offensive. They set about their work unaware of the events unfolding elsewhere that would change the course of history until they received their first report, which, according to Master Sid, was unusually brief. The Garleans have deployed a powerful weapon to the Eorzean front. We tried to contact our comrades at Ralgar's Reach, but received no reply. Despite lacking several essential details, the message was entirely accurate. The reason the sender had been unable to communicate with said comrades was simple. They had been annihilated by the Black Rose, a poisonous gas developed by the Garleans. This ingenious weapon halts the flow of ether within organic beings, causing near-immediate cessation of respiratory functions. Being highly potent and capable of rapid dispersal across a wide area, the majority of the settlements in nearby Alamigo were almost entirely depopulated in the aftermath. Contemporary reports state that the damage extended far beyond Alliance-held regions, such as the Black Shroud and Thanalan, to several Imperial territories, resulting in a significant loss of life. As my present configuration is only equipped with the basic audio-visual receptors, I must draw my conclusions from limited, and I am compelled to admit, unreliable sources of information. At the time of the Black Rose's deployment, I was otherwise engaged deep within Ogomoro and was unable to make detailed observations of the weapon's effects. The yellow-plumed creature that was accompanying me had appeared to sense something at the approximate moment that the gas was released, gazing into temporary space with an expression that mortals describe as perturbed. Oh, wait a second. This is not a point of view from a node. This is from Omega. Let's see here. Objective: to record and analyze events according to the 8th Umbral Calamity based on information acquired from Sid Garland. Master Garland has made numerous attempts to initiate conversation with me despite my current vessel being no more than a simplistic automaton conceived as a plaything, lacking any oratory mechanisms which to respond. These utterances, though made in a state of obvious intoxication, provided me with invaluable data. While the individual recordings contain a wide range of observations, many are superfluous in my investigation, so I have compiled only those I deem relevant. Black Rose wrought immeasurable destruction to organic life forms, resulting in widespread environmental upheaval. The ambient ether ceased to flow among its normal channels and stagnated, rendering the land barren and uninhabitable. Inevitably, the wild imbalance of natural energies affected neighboring regions and, in some cases, led to sudden and unpredictable alterations in flora and fauna. Overnight, the crops on which man relied for sustenance became toxic, further increasing the death toll. In the aftermath of these unprecedented disasters, the communities formed by sentient beings fell into disarray, and all forms of societal organization, from small settlements to entire nations, were abandoned as individuals struggled desperately to avoid annihilation. It did not take long for the cascading environment repercussions to be felt in Garlean territory. Due to the after effects of Black Rose, the ceruleum that once supported daily life in the Empire and powered its Magitech armies failed to combust. The machines fell silent, bereft of the energy required to set them in motion. The creatures that escaped the initial devastation were thrust into a battle of survival. Among them, those belonging to supposedly civilized races were particularly quick to turn on their brethren in a bid to seize control of land and resources. While they attempted to justify these wanton acts of violence within a range of superficially logical explanations, it is my assessment that greed and desperation were the primary motivating factors behind their actions. Master Sid and his colleagues frequently referred to this situation as a quagmire, though in a figurative rather than literal sense. Much like an actual quagmire, it threatened to pull mankind to an inescapable predicament. Correct interpretation of the audio data recorded at the time is dependent on accurate comprehension of this metaphorical expression. The mortals who found themselves in this quagmire were no longer governed or protected by societal conventions or social norms, instead reverting to a more primitive way of life, closer to those referred to as beastkin. However, certain groups of sentient beings were reluctant to accept this descent into savagery, with Garland Ironworks being one such example. Its members expended considerable time and effort in a largely unsuccessful attempts to bring an end to these numerous conflicts that had erupted. In addition, they hunted down and reprimanded those who might sought to profit from the desperation of their fellow survivors and offered a safe haven to the exploited. While their deeds had earned them the support of many like-minded individuals, the number of comrades gained paled in comparison to those lost in the days which followed. I recorded one particular incident in which a Lalafella engineer was carried back to headquarters after being mauled by a carnivorous beast while overseeing the digging of a well. Despite the treatments administered by trained chirurgeons, his wounds were beyond healing, and his vital organs began to fade. As he lay dying, one Ironworks member in particular, a rugged and male considered to be the stricken Lalafel's closest friend, refused to leave his side. Gripping the patient's limp hand and whispering words of encouragement, appeared to revive him for a few brief moments. Drawing on his final verses of stamina, the diminutive engineer demanded that his counterpart live on and produce offspring to continue his legacy. To this, the larger Mannix responded with a trembling voice. "It's high time you started a family yourself," though that was, regrettably, not a realistic prospect. Smiling, the Lalafell replied, "Sorry, but no one will ever compare to her." These were his final words. The Lalafell's death prompted an emotional response from my feathered associate, who had pressed his tear-stained cheek against the lifeless body. Some time later, once Master Sid and his colleagues were finally exhausted their supply of tears, they gathered for a lengthy discussion, their expressions growing ever more despondent as talks continued. They eventually arrived at the conclusion that they lacked the means to restore their shattered world, with the only viable option being to entrust future generations with the knowledge that they had accumulated, in the hopes that their successors may one day find a solution. This was met with some resistance, however, as many expressed disapproval of the idea of forsaking those in the present day in order to save a world they would never live to see. Unable to deny this, Master Sid simply nodded and said, "Even so, our sacrifice will not be for naught." With that, Garland Ironworks found what I believe to be its true purpose. Objective: to continue recording and analyzing events surrounding the 8th Underworld Calamity. I wanted to take a pause here, because, for all intents and purposes, it's either been a long time since I've read these, or I haven't read them at all. And for those in the know of Final Fantasy XIV, this is not... it's not exactly canon. This man, Sid Garland, and all who are with him, these characters who seem to be dying, it's an alternate timeline. This is a what-if scenario. But that's all I'll say, because if you want to know, it's better to experience this in the actual game. That said, we've a few minutes left before I end for the night. After all, I'm only going to be here for about an hour. And because if you didn't know, I will be streaming every day for as long as I can, for a minimum of 1 hour, doing things like this. I might appear on other people's streams here and there, but for the most part I'll be staying in my lane and doing things like this. So, let us continue. From the point of view of this version of Omega. Objective: to continue recording and analyzing events surrounding the 8th Underworld Calamity. The researchers of Garland Ironworks continue to investigate the process by which Black Rose, possessed of a destructive power far exceeding its creator's expectations, triggered the 8th Umbral Calamity. They believe that understanding the nature of this catastrophe could reveal a means by which it might be averted entirely. Their aim was to change the past to create an alternate reality in which the calamity never occurred, a feat rendered inconceivable by their knowledge of the advanced technologies of fallen civilizations. However, many of those who would bear the burden of continued existence in a world ravaged by Black Rose failed to see this as a viable stratagem. Such responses were consistent with my predictions, as it is generally the primary objective of all life forms to secure their own survival in the here and now. Many of Sid's followers either refused to cooperate or expressed a desire to leave the ironworks together. Certain former employees went as far as to appropriate equipment and supplies by force before heading into the wilderness to fend for themselves. Although the vast majority opposed Master Sid's radical proposition, a select few remained to lend their assistance. Research into the 8th Umbral Calamity continued, aided by experts in the fields of magic and ethereal science. During this period, one loyal scholar noted that while preventing the disaster may not solve all of the problems that had afflicted the world of the past, the one dubbed Warrior of Light would still be alive. The various members of the team each had their own personal connection with the deceased, and the notion of creating an alternative past in which their hero survived the calamity met with unanimous approval. It is impossible to discern the manner in which this theory affected the motivation of the Ironworks staff and their associates, or whether some other external factor triggered a sudden increase in their mental faculties. But the fact that they had eventually succeeded in unraveling the mysteries surrounding the 8th Umbral Calamity is a matter of record. In addition, by presenting their plan as an attempt to save the Warrior of Light rather than a bid to rewrite history, they were able to gain the support from survivors in many different species and subgroups. Representatives from various settlements came to donate resources and foodstuffs to Garland Ironworks, despite possessing barely enough to sustain themselves. Many of them were also acquainted with the Warrior of Light, some even claiming to have been beneficiaries of the late hero's acts of philanthropy. A semi-aquatic creature known as Namazu, who had arrived bearing donations, imparted information apparently gleaned from premonitory dreams. The following is an extract of his recorded testimony. The world was never in such a ruinous state by the vision sent to me by the Big One. Oh no. Seigetsu the Enlightened said that the future eyewitness was part of another history, a different chain of events with no eighth umbral calamity at all, whatever that means. It remains to be seen whether this is anything more than the nonsensical ramblings of an anthropomorphic catfish, but I shall store it in my databanks for future analysis. So, for those who don't know, they're talking about a Namazu. Or I guess they already mentioned that was a Namazu. It's a catfish man. Over time, support for the ironworks continued to grow, their cause finding allies in the most unexpected of quarters. Memorably, during a routine mission transporting research materials, one of their vessels was ambushed by bandits, only to be rescued by an immense airship captained by a golden-haired Hur claiming to be a sky pirate. She is reported to have made the following declaration. My mother was snatched from the jaws of death by this champion of yours. As her successor and queen of the skies, I mean to see that repaid in full. Instances of ironworks representatives being extricated from perilous situations were abnormally frequent, their apparent saviors including multiple non-humanoid entities. In one such example, an emissary who was attacked and thrown overboard while crossing the Ruby Sea reported upon the shore of a nearby island with a vague recollection of having been borne to safety by a large beast, possibly Chelonian or serpentine in nature. Stormblood things, I suppose. In a similar incident, an ill-equipped messenger would have fallen to his death while traversing the peaks of Som-Ai, for not for the intervention of a colossal white-winged creature, later identified as a dragon. According to official report, there was a brief exchange in which the Dravanian rescuer expressed its interest in the affairs of man, particularly his insatiable thirst for conflict, before disappearing into the clouds. It must be noted that due to the lack of independent eyewitnesses or material evidence, this account remains unverified. Oh boy, this is long. Objective: to continue recording and analyzing events surrounding the 8th Umbral Calamity. With admiral dedication for a mortal, Master Sid continued to labor until the end of his natural lifespan. The years of painstaking research clearly took their toll. However, one day, as he penned final words into his grand theory, I observed his hand quiver as if the weight of his quill had at last defeated him. Breathing a heavy sigh, he turned to Master Nero, who made the same struggling gesture that I have observed on many occasions before, saying, "Well, it certainly took you long enough." Previous analysis of Nero's behavioral patterns indicate that this was meant as a compliment, though Master Sid's exasperated expression appeared to suggest it was not received as such. Be that as it may, the brief smile that had subsequently crossed his lips led me to believe that he understood his counterpart's intent. Slowly raising to his feet, he then shuffled towards the well-known device known as a boil master and poured coffee into 2 metallic containers, passing one to Master Nero. They duly raised their receptacles and brought them together in a percussive toasting, a ritual I have seldom witnessed. There have been little cause for celebration. The pair sipped their drinks, and for once, Master Nero refrained from expressing his distaste for the brew, a noteworthy anomaly. Master Sid then turned his gaze to a stack of papers on the desk and initiated the following exchange. So, do you think this mad scheme of ours will ever come to fruition? Only time will tell, Garland. Lest you forget, the road to ruin is lined with good intentions, which your young protégés have in abundance. We can but hope they do a better job of saving the world than we did. Indeed, it's in their hands now. No further words were exchanged, and my sensors yielded no indication as to the thoughts which occupied the pair's minds. So they stood in silence. I attempted to form my own answer to Sid's question. I could by this time emulate the cognitive processes of organic beings, as had done one in particular occasion many years ago, in the moments immediately prior to the irreversible dissolution of my previous vessel. With what might be termed wakeful eyes, I reviewed the reports made by Ironworks followers following their investigations into the Crystal Tower, the mechanical primal known as Alexander, and that interdimensional rift, the findings of which were instrumental in formulating the plan to alter the past. Thus, I did recover that each of these missions had one common element. They ended with a key figure entering a form of self-imposed exile, not unlike deep slumber. At times like these, when one is to be separated from one's companions, whether by sleep or death, there is a phrase in which I have found to be particularly fitting. Good night. And after the night comes the morning, the sun rises to greet the new day. While it may already be too late to mend this dying world, there are those who would strive to create a place where the sun will shine again, not for their own sake, but for those in the past that may yet be saved. I think this must be what mortals call hope. It is beautiful. Knowing all these are stories that give context to characters and events that lead up to Shadowbringers, and knowing what happens in Shadowbringers and how Shadowbringers came to be about, it's really beautiful and a little dark as well. For those who don't understand what was going on, and without getting too much into the story, like I said before, this is an alternate reality. This is a what-if scenario, and what the characters have done, that despite their own deaths and despite all their efforts, they know they are dying, and it's too late for them. However, with the remaining strength that they have, there's a line here that is very important. There are those who would strive to create a place where the sun will shine again, not for their own sake, but for those in a past that may yet be saved. They are looking to fight for a future that they themselves will never see, but through their efforts, the ones behind them can live. And I think, that is a good parallel to, what we do as adults, what our parents did for us, at least, their generation, to make things easier for those to follow. Kind of reminds me of one of my favorite animes of all time, Gurren Lagann, which is about, paving the way for those that follow. Yeah, I love these little lore drops, which I'm glad, that there are people here to kind of listen to this little rambling of mine, especially since I'm choosing to take a different turn in my VTubing. It's been a strange couple of years, and for me, it's only been, I suppose it's been almost 2 years. I think it'll be 2 years in September, actually. But that said, I think this is where we're gonna end tonight. I don't know if I want to read out. It's already late for me, so I should head to bed. Yeah, so I'm just gonna end here. Thank you everyone who decided to stay and chill. And this is the kind of stuff you'll see moving forward. It may not be ASMR, but we're gonna stick to cozy, solo, and just chill. Nothing extravagant, no big games or anything. It's just gonna be you and me and a little story. I want us to keep it comfortable. Thank you, Amaya. Well, if it helps, I'm gonna try keep it at a reasonable hour, because for me it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning and I still gotta wake up early. That's it for me.